for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Merry meet and merry part, bright the cheeks and warm the heart. For tread the circle thrice about, to keep unwelcome spirits out. Abide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold laws you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. These 8 words the read fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will.
Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron on the Para-X Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Merry meet everybody and welcome. My guest tonight is Dana Driscoll, and we'll be talking about her new book, Land Healing, Physical and Ritual Approaches for Healing the Earth. Dana has been an animist and bioregional druid for 20 years and currently serves as the Grand Archdruid in the Ancient Order of Druids in America. She's also a Druid grade member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. She took up the path of land healing because of the deep need in her home region of western Pennsylvania, which is challenged by fracking, acid mine drainage into streams, logging, and mountaintop removal. She sees land healing as her core personal spiritual path and has done both individual work in her home region as well as spearheading larger scale land healing efforts in Druid different events and throughout the ancient order of the Druids of America. Dana is a certified permaculture designer and permaculture teacher who teaches sustainable living and wild food foraging. Questions from the chat room are welcome. And if you're listening live outside the chat room and you want to pop into the chat room, come on over to paraxradionetwork.com. So, hi, Dana, and welcome.
Hello.
I think I'm going to trade my notes for something today. This is really weird. It's like four words across, and then it goes straight down. So I'm going up and down and down. But we'll talk about the book, and you're going to do most of the talking, so this is good. So the book is a comprehensive guide to land healing for neopagans and earth-based spiritual practitioners who have a desire to regenerate and heal human-caused danger throughout the world. And I had a message from a Facebook friend this afternoon, saw the banner, who couldn't make it tonight and wanted to know if, because we've done so much damage over time, is it even possible to heal and regenerate, or would that be that, saving things and just saving it and not letting it get worse?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And, a lot of the approaches in this book and it is all about sort of working locally. So, I think that when we think about land healing on a global scale, it becomes really massive and it becomes really very large, right? And then this is actually where ceremonial approaches or ritual approaches of lots of people can really help, right? And lots of people's actions. The land healing book and a lot of what I cover in here is really about, well, how do you make a difference in the land right outside your house? How do you regenerate even a small piece of land, either physically, putting in gardens, fostering ecosystems, or doing with the more metaphysical approaches. So there's absolutely a chance for you to do good anywhere. And I definitely think that right now it's almost like an all hands on deck kind of situation. We know that in the next, 30 years, we have a lot of tipping points. We know there's a lot of species that are at risk, but it could be, the work of just small numbers of people that could actually do a lot of good.
Yeah. I mean, it's some people don't take notice of it. Other people do, and I think a lot of people just want to sit back and say, okay, somebody else will do it. Somebody is going to have to do it, but not me kind of thing. So that's probably an awakening too when, people pick up this book and stuff. It might help get more people out there.
I hope so. Yeah, for sure. And I think the other thing that's really happened is that, we've seen this a lot in the Druid orders. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the pandemic has really shifted a lot of things. A lot of people have found nature spirituality. A lot of Druid orders, we've almost doubled our membership in 2 or 3 years, which is kind of crazy. We've almost doubled our membership in AODA, for example. And I know there's a number of other Druid orders globally that have had the same thing, and other, so there is this sort of new awakening happening now with an entire new generation of people that are coming into various neo-pagan practices. And I think that there is a lot of interest in, wow, okay, I just spent the pandemic getting outside. How do I protect and heal this land? How do I develop a spiritual relationship with it? So I think it's a really good time to really be talking about these, especially also as we have, so many like sort of larger scale global climate change issues and fires and, things that are just happening now that are kind of hard to ignore. So this book is sort of giving us responses to all of that.
Forewarned is, forearmed, I guess. And that, it makes a big difference. So land healing is, you say, a spiritual and sustainable practice, and you've created a network of people who are choosing to take up the work. When did all this begin?
Well, for me, it probably began when I was a child. And it really that's the case because when I was a child, I experienced, and as a teenager, I experienced firsthand a lot of the things that I, as an adult understood better. The forest that I had spent my childhood in was brutally logged when I was 13 or 14 years old. And, I was so hurt by that experience that I almost didn't go back in. And it was almost 10 years later till I went back into the forest. And at that time, I realized how much the forest had regenerated and how much I missed the forest. And in many ways, that moment was the first steps to me even becoming a Druid. And so I see that sort of land healing has woven into like my entire life. And then, living where I do, and you started to talk about that in the introduction, I have just experienced not only the physical ramifications of things like fracking and mountaintop removal, and logging and all these other things, pollution, but also as a nature-based spiritual practitioner and as a neo-pagan, I also experienced the metaphysical ramifications of that, the, suffering of the spirits of the land, the disruption of ley lines, all those things. And so, I think that sort of set of experiences that really, go across a lifetime, brought me to the place where I'm at now, trying to do this, this work, on my own, and then realizing, wow, this is really big, and I should probably write about this and involve others and try to encourage folks to do this work more broadly.
In publishing, they always have trends and stuff. Did you have trouble getting a publisher because that might not have been trendy at the time?
This is my third book with my publisher, Red Feather, which is an imprint of Schiffer. I think that my first book is Sacred Actions, Living the Wheel of the Year through Centered Sustainable Practices. That book has been really well received. And that book, is, this land healing book is a very much more specific magical focus on a particular kind of regenerative pagan practice. That book is more of a Wheel of the Year approach to like, okay, I'm a pagan. I practice earth-based spirituality. How do I live that and weave that into my everyday life? And so I do think, and some of the stuff I was saying earlier about sort of the rise of a whole new generation of not only pagans, but I would say young pagans. I think that these issues I think this is a good time for the book. Maybe I would have had trouble getting it published 10 years ago, but I think now is the right time. And a lot of people that I've been talking to are really excited about doing this work, about having tools, because, it's even like last year, on the East Coast, we saw smoke blanketing our skies for the first time. Wow. And neo-pagans were saying, what do I do? Right? Well, the book has answers for that. How do we, even if I can't physically do anything, I can offer rituals, I can offer healing, but what's the best approach to that? So I think that this time where there's a lot of consciousness surrounding the ecological realities that we face as a whole, as a human civilization, as a world, I think the time is right for something like this.
Yeah, well, long overdue in a matter of speaking.
Yes, true.
Got a question from the chat room. She says, "What do you think of rewilding? To what point in time should a lot of land be rewilded? Oh my God, rewilded too. Anyway, 300 years or even 700 years ago, maybe.
Yeah, I am an extremely big proponent of rewilding, and I do a lot of that in my own practice. I actually have another book that's in progress that's taking up those issues in more detail than in this book. But in this book, we talk about things like seed scattering, growing seeds that are rare on the landscape and scattering them in wild places, for example. And the whole idea, I'll just describe the whole idea of rewilding. There's actually a couple of different philosophies and a couple of different definitions of what rewilding is. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what you're, there's sort of the, how do we bring ecosystems back? There's a lot of emphasis on, like the natural patterns of the land, which are driven by predators. So apex predators, bringing them back and helping the land heal through the movement of herds and such. So there's like this really great video about Yellowstone and wolves, for example, is a great example of that kind of rewilding. But there's also all of this rewilding people are talking about in cities and in local communities where we are sort of recognizing that there are, that we are ourselves part of nature and we've got this like sort of wild energy. So it can even be things like wild food foraging or that reciprocal practice with that. It can be saying, well, how do we bring back pieces of wildness and pieces of sort of nature in sort of a more untamed capacity? How do we recognize that sometimes we can be tenders and healers, but we don't have to control everything? So it could even be something like, okay, you have an acre and you've been mowing all of the grass for years, and that's a lot of fossil fuels. But if you only mowed a small area that you needed and then allowed the rest to go back to whatever it wants to be, whether that's a field, whether that's an oak savanna, whether that's an oak hickory forest, there's a lot of joy and a lot of healing in that. So it's really, and I think there's a lot of that in this book, really thinking about that. And I definitely think that is one of the practices that I use and that I live, both in terms of my sort of philosophical standpoint, but also, you had mentioned animism. I think sort of from a magical standpoint, thinking about if the world is alive and full of spirit, it's not really my place to control all of that, but rather just be part of that. I am just an animal living on the land, and recognizing that that's who I am and that I can be in relationship with all these other sovereign beings in a magical sense then really changes. Well, then how am I going to treat that lawn? Maybe mowing the entire thing isn't a good idea. Maybe I can convert part of it to a butterfly garden or, food forest and build an ecosystem where there's life that's better than just, and not carefully control it necessarily. Right. So there's sort of all sorts of philosophies within, the broader movement of rewilding, but I'm definitely a big fan and it's definitely woven into this work.
Good. So somebody is sitting home thinking, why does land healing critically matter?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think that, to be frank, we as a human species are facing an ecological disaster that is threatening all life on Earth. And, this is the challenge of our age. There is nothing more pressing than not having a home that is stable to live on. We've moved into this current phase, which we call the Anthropocene, which the Holocene lasted for 8,000 years. It's when humans developed agriculture. It's when industrialization happened. And now we're seeing the human-driven changes, and they're not good. And I mean, you can look at the headlines every day. You can look at the changes in your local ecosystem if you just pay attention. So I think that right now, finding all of us, every one of us, finding ways of learning how to live in a more regenerative way and aligning both our physical worldview with that, but also aligning some of our magical work and our metaphysical worldview. There are problems that are so huge that, I as a single human and even a group of my friends, even a whole local group, maybe it's too big for us to tackle. But if we can't tackle it physically, we can tackle it metaphysically, right? As above, so below, as within, so without. So even if so there is this idea that the more of that energy we put into the world, the better, right? And we're really needed. It's a really, I see it as a really critical time where we still do have time to make a lot of positive changes and build this sort of brighter future that we want to build. And this book to me is just a set of tools that I hope people can pick up and use and, have something to work with.
And it's very comprehensive. I don't think any stone was left unturned. And this is really good. Because as I told you the other day, it's going to be hard to kind of cover the book in different ways because there's just so much information in there. But so let's talk about some of the frameworks and perspectives used in the book. Sure.
So the main framework and perspective I use in the book is basically that there are. It's sort of I started to get into it already. The idea that there is a metaphysical world and a physical world. And within the metaphysical world, we have ceremonial activities. We have magic that we can work. And in the physical world, we can actually work to regenerate using permaculture, rewilding, all these different practices, right? And I provide information on both of those because I am a certified permaculture designer, and I've been practicing permaculture for quite a long time in my life. And I live in a 5-acre farm where and really 5-acre, I say farm, homestead. We only have about a half an acre that we actually cultivate, and the rest is wild and food forest and all these things. We do a lot of ceremony there. So I'm sort of living a lot of these practices as I can. And so there's a whole section of like, how do you physically regenerate the land? What does that look like? How do you understand what a healthy ecosystem looks like? How do you understand ecological succession? How do you take different steps? And then how do you weave that physical work if you're able to do it? Not everybody is. So some people live in cities and live in apartments. But regardless, like, how do you do metaphysical land healing? And I break metaphysical land healing down into several categories. So on one hand, we have something like a logged forest that has the capacity to be healed. And I would want to bring all this healing and blessing energy in, right? So that's sort of one scenario. But in another scenario, you have something like the mountaintop removal or an acid mine drainage, where there is an ongoing suffering on the land, and there's ongoing pollution. And that's not something that could be healed at this time. So there's a whole set of palliative care practices, working with land that might be damaged or even in the future destroyed. So, maybe an oil pipeline is coming through your beautiful forest and it's happening next month. What are you going to do now? That's really, really different than the forest that wants to regenerate right now, right? So we sort of break those apart. And then along with that, I also have an entire chapter on psychopomping and working with the spirits that pass, because I think that the deeper that I've gotten into land healing work, that's a part of it. Sometimes those spirits have to be released in order to heal. So I've got a whole chapter on that, which I was sort of surprised when spirits led me to write that chapter, because, some people are saying, oh, this is a book on healing. Why is there psychopomping? Because that's part of that. It's part of the cycle of life, right? And then the last part of this is thinking about self-care. And there's a chapter on self-care, because if you are wounded yourself, you can't heal. And so really thinking about, how do we nourish and care for ourselves as healers? Because the other part of this, and the reason that so many people, I think, have difficulty with these sort of issues we're talking about, is that this is really hard and it's really overwhelming, and you can really have a lot of anxiety and grief. And so there's a whole chapter on how to sort of process that so that you can be, that you can do good work in the world.
Yeah. So I might be jumping around a little bit, but what is the Land Healer's Crane Bag?
Okay. So I am a druid, and I've been a druid for 20 years, as you said. And so I do draw pretty heavily upon druid frameworks, and both in terms of individual work, but also in terms of group work that I've done over a long period of time in the druid community. And so in druidry, we have this magical bag called the Crane Bag. It comes out of Irish mythology. And in the modern sense, what it is it's sort of the bag where you keep all of your tools. So this is so for land healing, I would have various tools that I could go out and I could use, not just in the land, not just in the woods, which is easy enough, right? I can go into the woods and do ritual, but what if I'm at a shopping mall and recognize there's a moment for me to heal? What if I'm walking down the street in a city and I see a tree that's been cut? What can I do in that moment when there's all these people around me? So the land healer's crane bag, I have a whole chapter on how to create your crane bag. There are all sorts of different tools that you can create, like the seed balls I've already mentioned, where you actually gather up seeds that are needed on the landscape that might be rare or endangered or less than used to be. So like milkweed seeds are a good example, or like American ginseng or ramps. United Plant Savers has a whole list for Eastern North America of the most at-risk species right now, for example. Or it might be that you have healing waters, healing oils. There are sigils in the book that you can create and then bless using rituals in the book that have different purposes. So, I'm walking in the middle of the city and I see a tree and, I just want to give that tree a little love and blessing. So I can put a little blessing sigil that I, painted with walnut ink on a stone right there at the base of the tree. And I've already done all of the ceremonial work in advance. So all that I do when I pull this out of my crane bag is just activate, just sit it there and activate. And nobody knows I'm in the middle of doing a magical working. Nobody can see it. I just take a moment. Right. So there's a lot of sort of surreptitious stuff because we do live in a world full of humans. And, obviously as neopagans, we know how rough it can be in certain places where we live and how sometimes hidden we have to be. But that's part of the work. So the bag is sort of a way of gathering those tools and creating a set of tools that allow you to go out and do this work in a wide variety of ways.
Okay. We were talking about physical land healing a little while ago. How can it create refugia for all life?
Okay, so refugia is a concept that I am so excited to share because this is getting back to the very first question you asked. Part of what I see is the role of each of us individually, those of us who have access to land or access to community land or spaces. So refugia is a concept that came out of Ice Age paleontology, and people basically studied the Ice Age, and what they found is that during the Ice Age, we had this massively inhospitable landscape, but we had these small patches of life. So like humans survived the Ice Age in the cliffs of the Mediterranean. Here in North America, we would have maybe like an area that was raised up off of the glaciers where a bunch of life was, or a microclimate. And now they're even talking about climate refugia, where there are places due to climate change and due to so much deforestation and all of these other pollutions and other issues, where there are places where life is thriving on this very minor scale, small scale. It could be as much as like a quarter of an acre. And maybe that's the only place that a species that's having a hard time holding on is holding on. And so this could be the way that you are making an incredible impact, is that you create refugia. So you say, okay, well, how can I foster a space for life on this planet, right? And maybe that's my quarter acre backyard, but I am going to create refugia there. I'm going to create a space that is hospitable and that is sacred and that is healing for, say, the insect species that I'm really worried about. So I'm going to plant the flowers that this insect species comes to. And I'm going to make sure there are sources of nectar and water and all these things. And there are places for the insect to hide. And I'm not going to cut all of the dead things down when winter comes so the insects can burrow in deep and come back out. So I am going to create this for this life. And this refugia then could maybe be the difference between this insect species surviving and not. And then if you think about that as a magical act, if you think about you created this tiny little refugia, but now you have this opportunity and you've created all this healing, this brilliant ball of energy. Well, now you can radiate that outward. Now you can spread those seeds. Now you can spread that healing. So it's a very powerful thinking about that sort of integration of the physical and the metaphysical. So refugia, I really think, is one of the most empowering concepts we can think about right now with talking about all these, because it is something that you can actually do that would make a substantial difference, which is so huge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one small thing can make everything really huge. And okay, you were just talking about local land, kind of. So how do we build trust with our local land?
Okay, so what I consider to be the fundamental first step of land healing is recognizing that the land has sovereignty, that the spirits of the land and the beings on the land have a right to decide whether or not they want you there and doing anything. I think we've had so many examples in the last 300 years of humans going in and thinking they know well, or just being greedy and taking what they want. And so the fundamental practice in this book is sort of the 101 is listening and witnessing and apology. So there's a whole chapter on that. And deep listening, meaning that, okay, I come across a place that's been damaged. Maybe there's a whole bunch of trees that have been cut down, and I'm like, wow, I'm a land healer. Can I do something for these trees? Can I do something to help the tree spirits pass? Can I help do something to heal this land and maybe offer some good energy so that this land can regenerate? But if I just walk in there and do it and I don't ask permission, then I'm no different than the person that came and cut the trees down. My intentions might be better, but I'm still doing something without that respect. So building trust in the land, the first step is I walk to the edge of that land and I sit down and maybe I use divination tools, maybe I use a pendulum or tarot cards or whatever, or maybe I just use my own inner intuition that I've developed. And I say, okay, I'm here. What do you need from me? Can I help? And sometimes the land might be like, go away. And the most important thing you could do is the land says to go away, you go away. Why? Because you are respecting the sovereignty of that land. You're respecting the land's right to say, hey, I don't want you here. And, if that was the case, as I describe in the book, you can come back in a couple of weeks and maybe, make a few more offerings and sit and say, okay, can I help now? And maybe the land's like, oh, great, you actually listened to me. Yes, now I welcome your help. So that is the basic trust building and the basic listening. And over time, when you begin to do this in your local area, whether that's an urban area, suburban area, rural area, wild areas, the spirits of the land take notice. And once the spirit of the land take notice, then they recognize that you are not here to sort of impose your will, but you're here to help and heal in the ways that the land asks. And that's very powerful because you are building that trust over time. And then if you're doing other good things, like you're going in to the local river and you're picking up garbage and you're scattering seeds and maybe you're, helping to build a community garden, all of these things, these are ways in which you become sort of one of the good humans, right? And that really matters. That matters from if we think about the land as being enchanted and alive and full of spirits, they're paying attention. So let's do the best work we can.
Yeah. So the trust is on both sides. It's not just going one way.
Yeah. Because the more that you build, the more the trust you build, the more that the spirits of that land are going to open up to you.
So somebody's going to sit here and think, well, I don't know if I could contact them. Maybe it's somebody that's not neopagan or doesn't have a lot of metaphysical experience, but it's somebody that wants to help. So is there a way that, an easy way that they can learn to hear what they don't see?
Yeah. So when I do a lot of community education where I live in Western Pennsylvania, and most of it is not the stuff we're talking about. Most of it is reciprocal herbalism practices. How do I both take the invasive species from the land that need to be harvested, and how do I put back more native species? Or how do I build a rain garden? Or how do I practice permaculture? What are the basic practices of that, right? How do I build an organic garden? And what blows my mind is that people, when they start getting their hands in the soil, when they start working with nature, when they start getting out in the woods, and they really just slow down, they take their phone and put it away, and they start listening, it's amazing how much body-based intuition we have, because that's a human skill, and every human has it. And so a lot of people, even if they have not spent, 20 years meditating and quieting their mind, they still have body-based intuition. And often you can walk into a room full of people, right? And you can read the energy. You can walk into a forest and read the energy. So I would encourage folks that are new to this is just start by paying attention to how your body feels. Pay attention to how you feel when you go to a new place. Pay attention. When you walk up to a tree, hello tree, can I say hello? And you get a kind of a good feeling, or you get a bad feeling. That's your body saying, that's your body intuition, right? Other simple tools, learning how to use a pendulum is really easy. And it's really clear and it's really direct, and you can ask simple yes, no questions. So that would be if you want to start moving more into the metaphysical side, that can be something that you can do. But and eventually you can build in things like meditation, which is really a gateway to a lot of the more deep inner listening practices. But that takes time. But I was sort of blown away by, I remember going to do my permaculture teacher training at an eco village, and it was amazing to hear folks that had never saw themselves as spiritual in any ways and would say they were agnostic or atheist talk about the soil and the reverence they had for the soil. And then by the end of our like 2 or 3 weeks together, everyone's doing rituals, in the woods. I'm leading a bunch of rituals in the woods, So I do think that there's lots of gateways into land healing, and you could be an herbalist, or you could be in a community garden, or a permaculturist, or a rewilder, and coming out from that really physical, like, I want to save this planet. Or you could be a neopagan saying, wow, these are some really awesome tools. How do I use them? And how do I build these as part of my spiritual practice? Which is really a lot of what this book is about. It's sort of being written to those two audiences.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to take a quick break, so everybody stay put, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Cauldron will be right back, so don't go away. If you end up with webbed feet, remember, you've been warned.
Demons, vampires, werewolves, skinwalkers, all of this and more, Sunday nights at midnight on the Staring Into the Abyss radio show. Come, get lost with us.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. Covenant House is the national leader providing safe housing for youth, 50 years strong. Every youth who walks into Covenant House gets clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. So, look closer at Covenant House and help us fight youth homelessness. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening in to Stirring the Cauldron. I just wanted to give you a quick heads up if you don't already know about the free weekly Witches Oracle deck readings that I post on my website every Monday. Now let me answer the age-old question before you ask it, which is, well, how do I know it's for me? And the answer is pretty simple. If you weren't meant to see it, you wouldn't know it was there. So if you're curious about what the week has in store for you, pop on over to marlabrooks.com every Monday and scroll down on the homepage, and there it will be.
Welcome back to Stirring the Cauldron. Once again, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
And my guest tonight is Dana Driscoll, and we're talking about her book, Land Healing. And I've got another question from the chat room. She says, I have fire ants. They're life. I don't want them there. So what do you do?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And so let's go back to this idea of sovereignty of all beings and negotiation, right? Mm-hmm. So in the same way that I've got a lot of poison ivy, and poison ivy is native on my landscape, and poison ivy, also known as sister ivy, she definitely gives me a lot of problems if I touch her. So what I recommend, thinking about how do we treat this being with respect that also maybe is in a place that I'm not comfortable, right? Like, I don't want poison ivy in the middle of my garden because, like, I'm going to have poison ivy all over me. So a lot of what people do in this case, a lot of what druids do, is we think about negotiation. Hey, fire ants, I really need you to not be here in my fire pit. You'll get hurt if you're in my fire pit. How about you move over there? And maybe you make some kind of agreement, right? I will not disturb any fire ant mounds that are over on that side of the yard. But if you're here, like, can we have you move, right? And that works surprisingly well. Oftentimes those folks, like, and I see all beings as people. So fire ants are people. Poison ivy is people. They're just, they're just non-human people, right? I like to sort of have that kind of respectful interaction. And over time, you'd be surprised how effective that is. There are times where maybe you have to cut a tree down, have a conversation with the tree. Hey, tree, you're a bit diseased. You're leaning towards my house. What can I do to honor you when I need to cut you down? And just recognizing, kind of going back to that deep listening piece, right? Recognizing the sovereignty of the world. Like, we as humans, we do have to do things in the world. We don't always like it, right? Like, I don't want the tree to fall down on my house. And that's going to be a huge problem for me. And then I won't be able to go out and do as much good work because I'm dealing with this tree on my house. And so really thinking about that in that way, I think, can be particularly helpful. So that would be some of my advice, in terms of just like, how do we recognize the world as sovereign, and how do we develop respectful interactions? And what I'm talking about is sort of very basic, like animism 101, recognizing that the world has spirits, recognizing that you are a member of that larger community, and really re-entering that community. Because right now, I think a lot of the problems we have, these big problems we've been talking about, they're problems because we humans have forgotten that we are part of the world and we're part of life, and that we aren't better than everybody else, right? We are equal, right? And so recognizing that and trying to be that way, trying to treat animals, plants, even stones, rivers, the same way that you would treat a person that you meet on the street for the first time, and having that kind of respectful interaction. You wouldn't go up to a person on the street and pull their hair, or take off their shirt, right? Why would you do that to a tree? So really thinking about that and just practicing that. I have a ton of writing about this on my blog, and I've got some of it in the book. So if I'll share my blog at the end. But there's a lot of sort of, how do we get into that practice? And then what's really cool about what I just said is that even if you aren't perfect, if you start making the attempt, and you're practicing any kind of earth-based religion, any kind of earth-based spirituality, any kind of neopaganism, which is all rooted in the earth, right, suddenly you get access to the deeper magic. Because if I'm respecting poison ivy in this deep way, let's say I have a problem and I need some allies, guess who's going to show up for me? Poison ivy. And what a great ally to have. But if all I do is go over there and not say a thing and rip poison ivy out, that's probably not somebody who's going to show up for me in my time of need. So that's a way to think about it, sort of from a magical perspective.
That's a good idea. But okay, so you were talking about some tree falling down, right? And you have to ask it or whatever. Now, does the plant spirit die with the tree, or does it go to some other tree, or where does this plant spirit go?
Well, see, as a druid, I hesitate to speak. We druids believe that every person has a right to their own set of beliefs. I can tell you what I believe, but I cannot speak for like it in general, right?
Yeah.
So I think that all spirits are alive, and spirit is something that obviously transcends the physical body. And the same way that we humans have spirits that transcend physical bodies. A lot of plants, in my experience, have sort of a larger, almost like archetypal spirit. So I can connect with the spirit of the oak, which I can sort of reach from many oaks. Or if there's, a big patch of poison ivy, there's a whole bunch of individual plants, but there might be sort of a larger spirit. And even if that patch is cut, that larger spirit sort of becomes part of the greater spirit of poison ivy, and then maybe grows into the new poison ivy that comes up. That's always been the way that I see it. And that's pretty consistent with a lot of other sort of like broader animistic practices. But, I like to talk about practices and not beliefs, because I think that everyone has the right to their own beliefs. And I think as you get in, if you start practicing animism and start thinking about it, these are the kinds of things that you sort of understand over time as you get deeper into it, which is really beautiful and often very surprising.
Yeah. All right. We got another chat room question. Do you agree that a great way to ground yourself to the earth is to go barefoot outside as much as possible?
Absolutely. I mean, this gets into this idea of rewilding, right? Rubber shoes, synthetic soles, they are probably doing some blocking. And getting your feet right on the earth, right in the soil, absolutely. Because then you're remembering what it's like, right? You're actually reconnecting directly to the earth. And one of the frameworks that I talk about in the book is the 7 elemental framework. So we have the traditional 4 elements, earth, air, fire, water, and then we also have 3 additional, which is above, below, and within. So the realm of the telluric currents which is sort of the way the Druids see this deep energy, which would be connected to ley lines, connected to sort of the core of the planet, but also sort of the energy that runs through the world. So you take your shoes off and you sort of put your feet in the soil, or you put your feet in water, running water, you're going to be able to really connect to that telluric energy and really feel that running through you. And that whole framework, there's lots of opportunities for doing various kinds of land healing with that larger framework. But yeah, absolutely.
All right. So there's a chapter on energy, ritual, and land blessings. Sorry. And in that chapter, you talk about the 7 elements of understanding energy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started just talking about that. So I can sort of continue. So yeah. So that's the framework that I use in the book. And it's actually one that we use a lot in the Ancient Order of Druids in America. It's a pretty old framework, thinking about, obviously, do we have 4 elements, 5 elements, or 7 elements? But they're all sort of right. Do we break spirit apart? We recognize spirit exists. In our case, we're breaking it and just sort of thinking about the energy that is coming down from the sun, the life giver, right? And the energy that is coming up from the earth, and sort of how does that meet and sort of coalesce? And there's a tremendous amount of ancient, like if you look at a lot of the ways that the ancient ley lines were structured, if you look at the way that many ancient civilizations built temples, you can look at this in ancient Greece, ancient China. They were well aware of these sort of 2 currents of energy coming together. And there's a really great book called Lines Upon the Landscape. And Nigel Pennick worked on this book, and he talks a lot about these sort of ancient civilizations that use these currents of energy. So those are parts of the framework that we use in the book. And that I introduced those in the book in conjunction with this idea of blessing. So one of the things that many peoples used to do prior to the industrial age is have various kinds of blessing for the land. And that blessing was sort of the humans providing nourishment. We were providing that metaphysical nourishment that may have been through sacrifice, for some ancient cultures that may have been providing a portion of the harvest, all of those things. And we see that very consistently in pre-Christian cultures and pagan cultures worldwide, right? We still see this idea of needing to do blessing and beseech the spirits of the land in current indigenous cultures. And so getting back to that. So one of the practices I offer, for example, is wassailing. So you go to your local apple orchard and you do an energetic blessing, and you are saying to the apples, here's a blessing, please be abundant. And the land needs that. The land is so starved of that right now, because that was something that the humans and land had for millennia. And really that's something that we've lost. And so that's another form of healing where I'm saying, as a land healer, I'm saying I am going to try to radiate blessings out to this broader landscape for abundance and fertility, so the land may be fruitful. I'm thinking about using the energetic frameworks to do that, or other approaches. I offer a number of approaches in that chapter.
Okay. I'm going to jump around again. We're talking about palliative care. What are palliative care altars? Okay,
so the idea of palliative care, I raised this a little earlier in the conversation, is sort of the difference of whether or not, land is able to be actively healed, or whether or not land might be damaged and actively being damaged. So I'll give an example here. A lot of mining techniques, like sand mining, salt mining, all these different mining techniques that really disrupt the land. I have a lot of coal mining where I live, which is now mostly mountaintop removal. And that's a great example of when I would use a palliative care altar. So I would recognize, I can't get to the mountaintop that's being removed because there's a big mine there, right? And I'm not allowed on that property. I might be able to get somewhat close, but probably what I would do is I would get close enough that I could get a stone or something from nearby, bring that back, and then create an altar. So I will be able to work healing at a distance for that piece of land where I obviously can't go because there's an active mining operation. And in the case of palliative care, I would probably want to work with sleep energy, work with lowering the vibration of that land, sort of recognizing that that's the same way that somebody who's super sick needs to sleep. So if you think about the human metaphor here, You have somebody who is really, really ill, and the best thing they can do is sleep until they're better. We don't want to wake them up. We don't want to send a whole bunch of, crazy energy their direction, because that's not what the land needs at this moment. So that idea of working with an altar at a distance, or working with a general altar for land healing, can be really productive.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. What is a sphere of protection?
Okay, so the sphere of protection is a technique using the 7 elements we were just talking about, those 7 directions. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a technique that comes out of the tradition of the Ancient Order of Druids in America, and I've adapted it for land healing and presented it in this book. And it's actually a ritual that we practice every day in AODA, but it's also kind of like the equivalent of like my mentor John Michael Greer always called it a Swiss Army knife, right? It's a ritual that you can do in a lot of different ways. So as you're drawing upon the 4 elements and then the above, below, within, you sort of pull them together, and I'm making hand motions, which you can't see. You pull them together and then you create a sphere, and that sphere could be protecting you. It could be protecting a larger piece of land. It could be radiating healing or blessing. So it's a very all-purpose ritual that you can learn to practice, and through it actually do a great deal of different things. So I offer that in the book and partly is because if you're neopagan, you're probably already working with the 4 elements or 5 elements, right? Or maybe 7. So this is sort of a ritual that should be somewhat familiar, but sort of with a new take. If you haven't, if you're not a member of AODA, which you probably aren't, learning this ritual in that way. But it's a really nice all-purpose healing ritual. I can do a great many things. I can heal people. I can work to heal, my goose flock if somebody has an injured leg, or my chickens. I can work to heal blighted plants that maybe need a little extra healing. I can use it to protect. I do a lot of protective work where I will go to a mountain and protect the whole mountain with that ritual, which once you practice it enough, you can do that kind of work.
And talk about some of the rituals that you have in the book, because, it's not just reading, you're doing things as well, show and tell, sort of.
Oh, so, yeah. There's a great deal of different rituals in the book. We've talked about a couple of them. Some of my favorite rituals are choosing a place where you're going to do a year-long healing ceremony and, raising a standing stone, or coming in and doing a ritual there every quarter to sort of extend that healing, and thinking about the way in which our land has a seasonal cycle, a wheel of the year, and doing a ritual across the wheel of the year for healing. Another ritual I have in there is using the Ogham, which is a Celtic tree alphabet that, which is another, really fun part of nature spirituality, to build specific chants that you can build for various purposes. So maybe maybe you're in a situation where there's a forest and it's going to be torn down to build a mall, and you're like, oh wow, I want to do something. What can I do? And one of the things you could do is go to that land, look at the chants, look at the different possibilities in the book, and then develop a chant that as you drive by every day, you can chant out your window, or you can go offer. So those are 2. We talked about wassailing. Another ritual that I have in there is sort of finding the drumbeat, feeling the heartbeat of the land and matching your heartbeat to that land. There's so many things. So I hope that's a little bit. I know we don't have a ton of time to talk through all of these.
No, but I wish we could, because they're really, really interesting. Let's talk a little bit again about choosing our grove or renewal space. It sounds really interesting. So how do you get started doing that? Just walking around and seeing something? Yeah.
Yeah, so the Grove of Renewal is one of the ways where we can combine the metaphysical and the physical. So we're talking about, okay, I would love to just, I've got this little space and it's a lawn, or it's, I want to create an ecosystem. But you do this, but what are you going to do on the metaphysical world? So I'll give our example here. We live on a little 5-acre parcel of land, and around us almost entirely are conventional farms. We have a beautiful stream that runs behind our home, and then about a half mile from where we are, it becomes acid mine drainage, and the stream is poisoned. And so we sort of are this little tiny ecosystem where we're doing all of this permaculture and regenerative practices and all this ritual work. And then out around us is sort of this really damaged landscape. And so the idea of the Grove of Renewal is that you take a tiny little place, and maybe that's, and it's also a refugia, right, which we talked about. You take this little place, and then you build it up physically, and then over time, the good energy in that place builds, and then you can use rituals to help radiate that outward for healing and blessing on the broader land. So choosing that place, oftentimes, again, it goes back to listening. Hey, land, I would love to do this. This is a cool practice. Let me tell you about it. And do you have a place where this would be best? Where could I build this? Would you like me to build this? So I would ask the land, and I would ask the spirits of the land, and I would use my intuition to guide me to the place where that work could happen. Because often the spirits of the land know more than we do. And maybe there's a great energetic ley line running under a very specific place. So if you put it there, it's going to have that boost, right? So that's the way to think about it, is reading about it and sort of saying, okay, I understand. Now, can I go out on my land and ask where would I put this? And would you like this even?
Let's talk real quickly about healing waters.
Yeah. So this is another technique that is in the book, and thinking about the element of water and the flow of water. One of the challenges that we have right now is we have challenges of our waterways. We've been talking a lot about, if you look at some of the challenges we have, it's the oceans, it's the waterways, it's all the plastic and microplastic in the ocean, it's the warming currents. And what's so interesting about the hydrological cycle is that you can do a blessing on a small amount of water. You can create blessed and healed waters, and then take those waters and offer them. And if I offered healing water in the stream behind my house, it'll eventually end up in the Gulf of Mexico, which is pretty awesome to think that I could provide some healing to the Gulf of Mexico and to the entire Mississippi, right? Just by leaving an offering there, and by doing a ritual there at the edge of the stream.
That's nice. One more thing, because people are always talking about energy, and you have a chapter, and you talk about raising or lowering energy. Is there one particular way that's better for than others if people don't know or they've never tried to create energy?
Yeah, I think that, so there's sort of, I would say in this book, there are definitely practices that are more basic, and there are definitely practices that are more advanced. And so, a very advanced energetic practitioner would be like, yeah, okay, this is great. I know how to do this. And somebody who is pretty new might have to take some time. So the sphere of protection that I described is a great way of, raising energy. I am connecting with these 7 directions. I'm connecting with the sources, these elemental sources that are present in all life and in all things on the landscape. And I'm pulling those together, and maybe then I'm radiating that out, right? Or if I wanted to lower energy, that was maybe the drum beat we talked about, right? Where I am connecting with the energetic flow of the land. And I'm saying, hey, land, there are a bunch of bulldozers coming here in a month, and let's slow down and let's sort of sink some of this energy in and lower this vibration so that you're not as awake and aware when it happens. And then I'm going to use, this is another ritual in the book, I'm going to use the drum beat to sort of keep slowing that land down, and saying to all the spirits there, hey, if you can get out of this space, please do so, because this is what's going to happen. So that'd be a good example of when you'd want to sort of lower and slow things down.
Okay, so what is the Land Healers Network, and can anybody join?
Absolutely. So I have information on my website about that, and really a lot of what we've been doing is sort of exploring these larger group rituals through the Ancient Order of Druids in America. And we're going to be releasing these open source at the spring equinox. And the idea is that we need to support each other. We need to be, whether or not you're using my book or you're using someone else's techniques or you're using your own, you're developed, I don't really care, because I think the important part is that we come together and we support each other. So this is a place where people can learn and grow, and as healers, and also participate in these larger group rituals that are sort of distributed group rituals. So, we all do, say, blessing for the air and the skies and the entire, thinking about everything that's going on in the air, all, carbon and all of these issues, right? We do blessings for the skies at the spring equinox, or we do blessings for the waterways. And so that's an opportunity for people to do that and just to sort of have regular connection with others.
So where can people find you? Websites and when they get to the website, what are they going to find?
Sure. So my website is www.thedruidsgarden.com. I've been blogging on land healing and permaculture and druidry and nature spirituality for I think 13 or 14 years now there. So I actually just recently hit post 600, and I figured I had written about 1.5 million words. So there's a lot of material there. And a lot of the material I worked out over time for this book, you could find pieces of that there. And that's where I have information on all of my books. I also have a tarot deck and 2 oracle decks. And I've got a couple more of those kinds of projects in the works too. And then I also have an Instagram because I'm an artist as well as a writer. So you can also find me on Instagram. It's Druids Garden Art. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff there, and that's where you can find all of my things.
And you end the book with, and afterwards, a vision of a healing world. What does that mean to everybody?
Well, so this gets into this idea that, we have the opportunity now, if there's enough of us, to create a better vision. And right now, if you think about what's happening out in the world, everything that we are saying is this doom and gloom. That's all we hear every day. Mm-hmm. But we already have every tool as a human civilization that we need to turn everything around. We have tools like herbalism and permaculture, rewilding, nature spirituality, natural building. All of these tools exist, and all it's up to us is to first, because we can change the world, but we need to have the vision to do so first. And so I really see that as a symbol of hope, that things are not hopeless. It's not too late for us. Like every single moment we have the opportunity to change. And the more that we recognize and hold on to that power of hope as a positive force in the world, the more, the more, and when all of us do this, and we can make a huge change in the world. We can heal this land. We can heal ourselves, and we can create better human societies while doing it.
That's a great way to end it. Thank you for joining us, and I think we're going to have you back about druidry in a few months, so that'll be really interesting. And so thank you for being here, and everybody in the chat room and listening all over the place, thank you as well. And until next time, everybody, blessed be, and merry meet again. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Please join us again next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2024. The Mysterioso March by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through Incompetech.com.